Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Minted Podcast. Super stoked about this episode because we have Brian Fanzo here on the show from NFT 365. And this is awesome because if you are aware of Brian's journey, then you know that he's been working on a journey that leads up to, Brian, I believe, November 20th or November 10th is the day.
November 11th.
November 11th. So this episode's actually going to drop on November 11th.
How about that?
So I didn't plan it. I didn't plan it. I looked at the calendar today and I was like, all right, when is this going to go out? So anyway, we're going to talk about that journey. But when this episode comes live is going to kind of be when this journey is culminating for Brian. If you're in the podcasting and NFT space, you probably have heard of what's going on over at NFT 365, but we'll get into that more today. Brian, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Some things work out perfectly like that. And so glad this works out on 11/11. Excited for the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have been podcasting for 343-ish days in a row. Today, when we record, it'll be 343 this afternoon on Twitter Spaces. Tell our audience, what in the world was Brian doing before you decided I'm going to podcast every day for a year?
I feel like I was sane before I came up with this.
And I think I just undercut you because I said podcast every day, but you decided to podcast and buy an NFT every day, which.
Yeah, it was, when we came up with the idea of doing a daily podcast, I was like, well, we can't do that unless I'm buying an NFT every day and kind of removing the barrier. And it sounds weird, but we came out with the idea November 6th, and 5 days later we launched the podcast and the buying an NFT every day. I like to say that's the only reason it happened, because if I had had more time to think about it, probably would have been able to talk myself out of a daily podcast. But this is my 8th podcast. I started podcasting. My very first one I started in 2013, and I like to think the funny part about that is if you added all 7 of my other podcasts up in total downloads, they wouldn't match what we got for total downloads of this one. So I had lots of trial and error. I had a couple successful podcasts as far as monetization, but for me, my full-time job has been as a keynote speaker. I travel, speak at different events, and podcasting has been my favorite medium to create since day one. It's my I have ADHD. It's my favorite medium to consume. It's where I get almost all of my news and information. I love the ability to multitask. I love the ability to have the intimacy of having someone in your ear. And so last summer, actually, we could probably go back last spring, I had launched a creator coin. I started leaning in more on, what does Web3 monetization look like? Where, what are these NFTs? And for me, I'm an early adoption, that's where I've spent most of my career helping brands, embrace everything from Google Plus was one of the ones that I helped. A lot of brands like IBM and Dell, launch their very first pages there. And for me, I was a huge fan of the blockchain, started talking about the blockchain in 2015, 2016, actually. That was a big, for me, it was the vehicle of transparent, authenticated information was really exciting, but I didn't like the financial component of crypto. So I kind of stayed away from crypto early on. And then NFTs, really the smart contract concept really hit me. But it wasn't until, I went to NFT NYC there in the beginning of November, and we went up there with one mission. My team, we went up there and said, hey, what can we learn about this space, and where does my skill set fit so that I can kind of stand out and build in this space? It wasn't to create a podcast. I actually, honestly, podcasting really wasn't the option for me at the moment. I wasn't thinking oh, we'll go up there and decide if there's a podcast. But I remember, as I was having a conversation, I went to a private screening of Beeple and Gary Vee. They did a rollout of the documentary about Beeple's whole story. And
because I was just a couple months after Beeple's sale.
And it blew me away. The idea that he had 5,000 digital pieces and one of them had sold for $400, yet he sells the entire collection at 69 million. There was something about that idea of the idea that you can just keep building and building and building and then eventually get paid off in the end. That's kind of what captivated me. And, I've had lucky to have a pretty good relationship with Gary since 2013, 2014. And he was giving me a little bit of hard time at that event. He was like, Fanzo, don't go don't go all in for brands like you have on every other early adoption, which, live video, I did a lot of that with brands. He's like, go all in for yourself. And I like, he kind of like shook me a little bit, and then I went back, and like, it was a, one of those things where we sat back, watched the documentary, and, we were drinking, going to eat some pizza as you do in New York. And, my business partner, Drew, looked at me and was like, we got to do something daily in this space. Like, we just have to do something daily. And I was like, yeah, it changes too much. Like, maybe daily does make a lot of sense. I was like, maybe we do a YouTube video. And then we were like both laughing, because I think I've attempted YouTube as a creator like probably 11 times in my career. I love live everything. But produced content has always been a struggle of mine. And then, a couple of days later on the train on the way back, he suggested, he's like, what if we did a daily podcast? And I threw out there, well, the only way I would do a daily podcast is if I also bought an NFT every day, and people were able to come on the journey without having to be financially obligated to kind of put money up to learn about the space. And then I was like, wow, what if we created like a time capsule with like what people did with his collection? And it was just like kind of like throwing it out. And, by the time we took a train from New York to Washington, DC, by the time we got off the train, I was like, are we going to do this? We're going to do a daily podcast. And just for context, my 7 podcasts, I always said like what day of the week it would come out. They were weekly, but I always joked like, I can't promise a consistent time. Like, I'm not that guy. Like, consistency is not my strength. So I would like episode 0 of every one of my podcasts is like, hey, here's me managing expectations. I'm not consistent. I will make sure it comes out, this day of the week, but I can't promise what time. So the idea of me doing a daily podcast, like, and it sounds kind of wild, but like, this was November 11th. We started, and I said, if I make it to Christmas, I'll be really proud of myself, just because I didn't see this as like, where it could possibly go. And then, I guess now that's all history, and we're now 343 days into this journey. And, it was about episode around 62, 63 that I kind of got the bug and was like, oh crap, like I can't see a day in the next year that I'm not doing the podcast. But up until
like,
then,
you like realize what that actually means to do a podcast every day for a year.
That's for sure. And not to mention, like, because the space is changing, and because I'm not really I tried batch recording 3 times across this period, but I would batch record, the market would change, something would drastically impact. And I'm like, oh man, I said something in that episode that doesn't relate right now. And I was like, okay, I can't. And I would throw out the episode. So eventually I was like, batch recording doesn't really work for me in this space, which, requires editing in real time, show notes in real time, upload, push it out, go to the next episode. Some of them recorded on Twitter Spaces, some are recorded on live video, some are recorded, in the streets of New York, as I did for one of the events, with my, my Zoom PR4 in my my fanny pack, with my headphones and my microphone in my hand. And so it's been a hell of a journey, that's for sure.
What's been the closest you've been to missing a day? Like the craziest, like, oh my gosh, are we going to get this out? What the heck's going on?
So there was one day, it's funny because it's the only day technically that I don't do the opening of the podcast. And what had happened was I had flown from, I believe I was in Denver, flew to LA and had 3 meetings in LA. And the meeting, like the happy hour meeting went from happy hour meeting to way too many drinks and into like an evening, experiment. And I had already recorded, right? I had recorded in that morning when I landed in LA, and I just, I thought I uploaded it. I had switched over to from Libsyn to Megaphone early on, and I've used Libsyn my entire podcasting life. And so when I switched to Megaphone, I just, I uploaded. I remember uploading. I remember even checking on my phone before I went to the meeting. And then it was pretty much like 11:30 at night. And my phone won't stop ringing. And I'm, I am definitely had a couple drinks, and I was in an Uber on the way back, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, they're like, we have no episode from you. And I'm like, you have to have an episode from me. Like, I see it up here. And what had happened was I had uploaded it like into drafts. Yeah. And for whatever reason, like the upload had frozen in the drafts, the audio that I had uploaded into our shared drive for my team. And thankfully I was like, hey, there's audio there. but you're gonna have to add an intro. And someone on my team, Kevin on my team, kind of kicked into his own little intro and was like, hey, I got an intro on there. It kicks us off, and he uploaded it. And by the time I got back to the hotel room, it was it was out there. But yeah, it was.
And then you listened to it,
one.
and the intro was like, hey, this is Kevin. Brian is tipsy in a cab somewhere in LA, so he couldn't make it.
Actually, I think he starts it off by going, so this might not be the voice you were expecting, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about storytelling. And the joke is always now has been like, it's one of our most popular episodes, which truthfully it is one of our most popular episodes. So I joke all the time that I'm like, oh, figures though. The one episode that it's not me the whole time is the most popular one. But yeah, the team definitely saved me on that one. That's for sure.
Yeah, I love that. So, like we said, 343 days, 343 NFTs. For those of our listeners that are like new to what you're doing, like what is this all building up to? And what's like the big picture vision of what you're wanting to do with this NFT 365 project?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea was, early, it's gone on its own realm. I even had a different name when we launched, right? Like I was like, hey, this is crypto. Like, let's do a cryptic name. And so it was called N3F6T5 is what I actually called the original podcast, which is like a cryptic way of NFT 365. And it was about like a month in that I was like, I couldn't even say it anymore. Like in a way, like I like really like it takes a lot to say that. And so, the podcast originally was like, for me, it was like, hey, I can get out my thoughts in real time, get content out there. And then buying the NFT every day originally was like, hey, I want to take people on this journey. And then eventually it started to become, wow, we're going to have a time capsule of NFTs that no one else is going to have. And then it became, wait a second, how the hell am I going to afford buying an NFT every day, right. Minting an NFT every day. And, especially those early days, November, December, average gas price on Ethereum NFTs was, in the $200 range, right? So I was spending, roughly $500 a day. And I initially was like, you know what, I'm going to have to like kind of crowdsource this to kind of make it happen. And so I sold some NFTs on December 12th. So exactly about a month and a day after we launched, I sold NFTs that said, hey, I'll split some of the revenue of the final collection piece with those that are helping kind of like support. So we sold 22 founders NFTs and then 365 super fans NFTs that we kind of minted out. And like even during that period, I was just thinking, I'm buying an NFT every day. It's gonna be a pretty cool experience. But then I would say 60 to 90 days in, I started buying NFTs on different blockchains, right? And now, up until this day now, I'm at 31 blockchain marketplaces that I bought an NFT on, which I don't think anyone can kind of throw that out there. Because most of them I would not suggest that you could buy ones.
That's like one of the feats that's like, good job, Brian. You did it, so none of us have to.
Yeah, pretty much. And trust me, the amount of times like I've lost crypto in like I move it into an exchange, I send it to a wallet. Then I'm like, oh man, it's not the right wallet. And I send to a different wallet. And then eventually I'm like, I started with $80. By the time I got to the wallet it needed to was like $30. The NFT I need to buy was $70. And I have to start all over. I've had a lot of those type of things. But, it started to become, I started referring to it more of a time capsule because, the different trends in the space, if you look at the NFTs I bought every day, they're there. And so I started tweeting out like every day I would buy an NFT. I would just tweet out the NFT. Then we started putting them on the website and it became now, the interesting part is early on, I thought like the podcast would be tied to the NFT much more than it is. But part of the problem was that people just assumed that it would be me pumping my bags and be like, oh, well, Brian's going to talk about whatever NFT he buys. It's going to be, and I was like really offended by that like idea. Cause I was like, hold on a second. Like I'm building something much bigger than that. And so for a lot of the podcast, I actually wouldn't even talk much about the project. I would just be like, oh, we bought an NFT every day. And I would kind of keep the two worlds separate. And I would say, over the last 3 or 4 months, they've come a little bit merged. But yeah, the idea is, on November 11th, we're going to auction off the entire collection as one NFT. So one person will auction and buy that one NFT. And with that one NFT, they're going to get all 365 NFTs that we bought for the entire year.
What do you like? I mean, like, obviously nobody had any idea that People's thing was going to go for 69 million. And I've heard him talk about it, be like, of what he thought it was going to sell for. Do you have any idea like what something like that is going to sell for? And also, do you have an idea of like what the like what the value of it, like just like what you've spent on it?
So yeah, so I know what I've spent, right? So we've been, a lot of this now in the final 30 days, I'm a little north of 180,000 USD spent on the collection as a whole. It's definitely one of those things like Beeple's where it's the sum of all of its parts is worth more than the actual individual collection. There are some, and it's really hard to figure out, right? Like one of the things I started off early realizing was that the collection needs to have more, like the story has to be the diversity of utility diversity. And so like I have like a Tom Brady mystery box that I minted on DraftKings, and the cool thing is I haven't opened the mystery box, and
as
at the time
fan, you bought a Tom Brady NFT.
No, trust me, very very difficult. Actually, about a month later I bought a Steelers NFT on NFT All Day, and it was like my counterbalance to being like, okay, the Brady NFT is in there. But what's neat about it is like I believe there is 8,000 of them or so, but now at this moment while we're recording, there's less than 100 that have not been revealed, and out of that 100 that have not been revealed, 3 of them are one of ones that have gone for $40,000 or higher. So there's like those kind of components. Like we have the Matrix NFT in there, and you could take the blue pill or the red pill. I didn't take any pill with the collection NFT, so whoever buys it will get to select. And there's a lot of things that kind of fall in line. And so like, I mean, it's funny if you asked, I went around in February and was starting to talk to some of the auction houses and marketplaces about like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this collection? Where do you think this all is going? And we got everything from people that would be willing to spend, 800 grand to, I jokingly put out to one person, I said, hey, it's November 11th, 11/11. I'm a big numbers guy. And he was like, I could see it going for 11.11 million. And I was like,
you were probably thinking like 1.1. He was
I was like, 11. Oh yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, okay. And then, and I did have someone that come in early and was like, Brian, if you pull this off, if you make it to the end, he's like, I'd be someone that would throw my name in the hat of spending a couple million on this time capsule. And for me, like in a weird way, the journey, I got my wallet got compromised in March. So some of my NFTs, personal NFTs and collection NFTs were exploited. So I ended up having to like buy them back. And I was able to get all of the ones that were, not all of them my personal wallet, a couple of my personal wallet ones. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get back, but I was able to get all the buns back for the collection. We haven't sold a single one of them, which I think is also kind of unique. None of them have been listed for sale. They've all, every marketplace, every blockchain, those they're sitting in wallets, right? So we have Solana and Tezos and Flow and Nifty and all these, known origin and all these different ones. But like the range right now is like in the multi-millions to, I don't think I will put it, for me, like the minimum auction bid will be somewhere close to that, $1 million range. I just think that, but it might take months for it to get that initial auction bid, which I'm okay with. I think the market is one thing that like kind of we all don't know how to kind of wrap our head around it, but it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun to kind of see how.
Will it be set up so that like who determines when the auction ends?
So it'll be 7 days after the minimum, the initial minimum bid is actually.
So once a bid initially sits for 7 days.
Yep.
Man, that's gonna be wild for you, like sitting in bed at like day 6 and then getting a ding and being like, all right, here we go again.
Yeah, that's exactly what I kind of thought of. And even talking to the auction houses, right? It was so funny. Like early on, everyone was interested. And then all of a sudden it was like, we're not sure about how this like all looks. Right. And then like even looking at the smart contract, and I'll tell you, like figuring out the legal nuances and the smart contract on the back end has been its own little animal. I think, the people that seem the most interested in buying it right now have a product or service in the Web3 space, and they look at it as like, wow, if we're the owners of this, and 5 years from now we can say, hey, we own the very first time capsule of NFTs. They could see that as a return. But yeah, who knows? We'll cool. See how it all goes.
Well, I'm excited about it. Again, when this episode goes live, the auction's live, so we'll put a link to it, and maybe one of our listeners will be the one to buy it. But at least go check it out.
There you go.
So I want to ask about something that you did that I thought was super unique. And like I mentioned, kind of before we hit record, I remember in August of 2021 thinking to myself, like, what if I just met Mark Cuban, gotten to spend some time with him. And I remember thinking on the plane, like, man, what if I like did this interview with him and it was NFT gated? Like, what if we made it so that you could only listen to it through an NFT? There was 1,000 of them. Initially, 1,000 people have access to this. That question kind of led me on the path of looking of really trying to figure out, okay, I want to figure out what podcasters are using NFTs. Bigger than that, just what content creators are using NFTs to engage their audience. My personal belief is that like I think NFTs are an amazing way to create community. And I think money follows community. Like if you have an engaged community, there's going to be monetization opportunities. And I think a lot of people are like, cool, let's mint all these NFTs and make all this money. And it's like, use NFTs to make a community. And if you have a good community, then there's going to be opportunities that come. I found you because you were one of, I mean, I could like find 5 podcasters, maybe. I'm being generous, that were actually minting their NFTs. There's tons of them that are talking about it, but you were minting NFTs and you were doing something really unique with your proof of listenership. And so tell me about the proof of listenership, tell our audience, and like, what did that little tool do to like engage your audience, and just like explain what that was to our audience?
Yeah, for sure. And man, was it's funny now looking back, right? Because I was in the same, like as you were saying, I was like, I like the token gated component of this is just beautiful, right? I think there's such a unique value prop. But let's face it, I think we have to be truthful about podcasting. I think it's the hardest medium in the world to market. I think there's no other medium that is more difficult. And this, firsthand, right? With, and I think part of the difficulty is, how do you get the people that already know that the podcasting app is on their phone, right? How do you get people to know to turn on notifications? How do you get them to listen to, and I've been presented with 150 different podcasting apps where people are like, you can do this and this and this. And I'm like, for me to get somebody on to another app to consume their podcast is a lift that I've tried many times, failed miserably. And so when I was looking at like the idea, like there was when we went to New York, there was this proof POAP, right? Yeah. The proof of attendance protocol. And I got a little frustrated with it. And I'll just say I had to learn my lesson on this because I've come full circle now. But when I first saw it, I was like, this is a Web3 participation trophy. I was like, I was like, cool. I got like this thing that says I was in New York, but it has zero utility. It technically wasn't an NFT. It lived in their own Web 2.5 app. And I was a little bit like, I refused to give in to that. And I wanted to make sure that like, with my audience, right, we had sold NFTs. I have a creator coin, ADHD creator coin that I now, it's almost
through Rally.
It is through Rally. It is through Rally. I launched on Rally, March 11th of 2021. And, my audience was very like, I had entry points through podcasts, through ADHD coin, through the NFTs, but definitely one of the things that I was like, how can I incentivize or reward people that are listening? Because this not only is this a daily podcast,
right,
but I can't do a podcast episode shorter than 40 minutes. Like I just, for whatever reason, I just love to talk. And like, there are certain episodes, I'm like, this topic's 11 minutes and it's 33 minutes. Right. And so like, I knew that the lift I was, the requirement for people that were listening on a regular basis was pretty heavy. And so I said, you know what we can do? We'll come up with an idea. I said, rather than doing POAPs where people are just getting something I can't control, I'll create NFTs. I'll mint NFTs myself. And then the way we'll gate it is that 6 episodes each month we'll give a keyword, and someone just goes to the website. They had to do it within 24 hours, so that's what incentivized people to always listen. They would go to the website, they would answer 3 questions. One of them included what was the word I said on that episode, and if they got 4 out of 6 for that month, we would airdrop them an NFT into their wallet. And that NFT initially would open a couple of Discord channels. And then what it would also do was starting to unlock them different benefits within the community, as far as they would get more airdrops of my coin than someone that didn't have that one. And then we decided, okay, we're going to make each one custom for that month. So like whatever our theme of the podcast was of that month, we would do it. And I will tell you, it was, the amount of, I think our very first month, which was January, I believe had like 127 people went through and got all 4 words correct, got the NFT. The second month, it was like 500 and something, right? And I was
that's substantial, because you think, this, like you think of the percentage of an audience that's going to do that level of work to go through that, like that's substantial.
It blew my mind.
100, honestly, 127, then 500, and then I'm sure it's going to.
Yeah. Well, and I was like, I remember thinking 127. I was like, what? And honestly, people on my team were like, Brian, we're getting thousands of downloads per episode. What do you mean? And I was like, hold on. I was like, let's think about this from like user behavior, and let's think about it from like, I need people that believe in all these different things. And so, interestingly enough, it fluctuated a lot. And, one of the things I had to learn with this podcast is that, the market and the sentiment of the total space really impacts my listenership. Right. And I don't know if I was as prepared for that as I had thought. Right. Cause I was like, oh, and let's face it, I launched in November, the market's good, even January, February, March, even as like things started to turn, there was so much buzz and so much great things around it. And then I would say you lead into April and May, and all of a sudden, sentiment is going down around crypto and NFTs. But I will say the beauty of it was that then we started saying, well, if you own 3 of the monthly ones, we're going to unlock merchandise at a different level, right? We're going to change. And so we started trying to add utility. And, I learned some lessons there as well, right? Because, there was a small group that were doing it every single month. But then there were some people that felt like, oh, if I don't have the previous month, then it's probably not worth it, right? And it's very much like anyone that's done, a Patreon campaign or, some kind of rewarding your fans. Like, you have to be able to reward your super fans, but you also have to onboard people. And, and with a daily podcast, as much as it's evergreen content, I made it very clear early on that like the podcast to me, we have someone today that messaged me and said, hey, he's on episode 15. So he had just started, and he sent me his notes, and he was like, every one of these things are gold for me right now. And I replied back and was like, that was my mission since day one. Now, most of podcasts in, like, I would say the NFT on a regular daily basis, or Monday through Friday, most of them are news heavy, right? And I wasn't news heavy, but there was like a lot of this kind of like things that were kind of going around. So yeah, it was, we did it for 6 months. What ended up being the barrier that I found that started to be really heavy was the amount of work it was for my team, right? To get the wallet, to airdrop the NFT, to make sure people, met the requirements, and then there were people that met the requirements that weren't like claiming the NFT. And then we were airdropping it. Like, how do you get people to remember that? And so like, we did pause it. We paused it in June. And which was nice is we have 6, months of that as a use case. And then this month we're doing a POAP version of it where, I'm kind of going full circle where I was like, okay, I'll use the POAP, but because I can gate on the POAP, I'm doing like some really cool merchandise things with Shopify where rather than it feeling like a participation trophy, if you get the POAP and you turn it in within that 24 hours, you're going to get a heavy discount on all of our merchandise, in our store. And so that was the other part of it that I loved what it was building and what it was proving. Yeah. But I do think the mechanics of it, the back end of it, I mean, I had 2 people pretty much full time, between uploading the art, minting the NFTs, airdropping them, cataloging it. It was a hell of a lot of work, but it was a fun test. And I think it's something we're going to continue to see kind of used, this proof of listenership, proof of attendance, proof of execution, proof of learning. I think all of those things are emerging, and we just have to figure out ways to kind of embrace them across the board.
Yeah. And it seems like there's some tools that are making it a little bit easier. The platform Uncut that's sponsoring this show, like they have password protection and different things like that to where people can just go and enter a password and it's automatically dropped into their wallet. And so I think that you kind of like laid a lot of the groundwork. And I think now some of the technology is going to make things like that a little bit easier. When you're looking at the creator economy, YouTubers, podcasters, streamers, sorry for other people, I'm including you too, but anybody that's creating content and wanting to do it for a living, what do you think the main opportunities are for them to actually mint their own NFTs, to engage their community? What do you see as some of the biggest opportunities for the creator economy in NFTs?
Yeah, I really do think it comes down to the 1,000 true fan model. I think we have all mentioned that, the essay that was put out by, by Kevin Cruz, many years ago, where, I've spent all these years, building up a fairly large audience across social media platforms. I was doing, at one point live video was my, my bread and butter. I would go live on Periscope or even Meerkat prior to, with 20,000 people watching me every day on live video. And the hardest part for me was like, how do we convert? Where are we getting, is it to an email list? And a lot of that was very clunky, let's be honest. And even with like a Patreon model, and it's no shot at Patreon, I think what those that figured out Patreon could really figure it out. But like for me, when I look at the creator economy, there are some creators that were really good at understanding funnel creation and getting people, to, the jab, right hook model of kind of putting it out there. The joke is, and Gary Vee has joked about this on his podcast, when he calls me out as like the guy that forgot to right hook, is what he always refers to me as, because I just love jabbing. Like, I love giving away free stuff and like free content, and I was very thankful, right? I sold sponsorships, and a lot of my clients would pay to be like, Brian, we want the podcast to keep going because it validates all our stuff. So like, I had Dell and Adobe and Samsung that sponsored my show and never asked for download numbers, never asked. Like, so but like for me, where I looked at that was I was benefiting because of what my career was as a speaker, right? I would speak at Adobe once a year. Adobe would just pay for my podcast sponsorship for the year, not really want to make anything of that. And I felt like for me, where the creator economy is beautiful is like, you don't need that big sponsor, right? And you don't need a podcast that is on the front page of Spotify. If you can figure out what is the value I can give my direct audience today, and then what are things that I can add on. And I'll just caveat that, like, my view of the creator economy a year ago was like, this is a game changer. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened. What I've had to learn was that, with utility and with ownership with your audience, it's more work than I think I imagined. It's a lot more of like, okay, if I'm going to make a promise where I say, hey, if you own this NFT, you're going to get these things, you have to deliver on those things, right? And it doesn't matter that the podcast kept delivering. If I wasn't delivering on the back end of the utility, I would lose people listening to the podcast, right? Yeah. And like, it was like, so much so that I hired 2 people on my team that literally their goal is to kick me every time, where if I'm going to drop the ball on something, or I'm like, man, here's an example. Every Friday this year, I've done a Zoom call with my community members that if they hold a certain number of ADHD coin or a certain combination of my NFTs, they get to join a 1-hour Zoom with me and answer, ask any questions they want, do anything they want. I'll tell you, daily podcast, flying and traveling, that Friday Zoom doesn't seem like much, but eventually it's caught up to me, right? It's a lot of work, but like, I have to remind myself every time, like, there are some people that bought that NFT in January, excited about a Friday call, never knowing that it was going to last all this time. Yeah. But there are some people that bought the NFT yesterday that are buying it for that call. And so like, you have to deliver the utility for like the original fans, current fans, future fans. And so I look at the creator economy as changing like the power structure from us having to sell to a big sponsor or, the platform, but it does require us to own every aspect of that value proposition, which is a lot of work and a lot more work than I think I ever realized.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about it. And it's scary, but also it's a cool opportunity, is there's a sense of accountability that comes with launching our own NFT projects.
Without question.
And I think this is why it's really going to separate a lot of creators, to where like right now it's still a super popular space. And I think it's only going to become more popular if creators wanting to launch NFTs. I think for the ones that own that process, like you're saying, and that actually deliver the value, it's going to be huge. They're going to realize, holy cow, I don't need millions of followers, and I can make a really good living and create content that I love. But on the flip side, I think there's going to be a ton that get really excited to launch projects and then realize, like, wait a second, I thought this was like a land grab. I thought this was something I could like launch, profit from, and then just keep doing my own thing. And so I think it's like a sense of accountability, which I think is going to give a lot of opportunity for creators right now that are probably pretty small, like probably pretty unknown, that they're going to take that accountability, and they're going to it's going to be a really good opportunity for new creators to kind of like rise to the top. So yeah, that's really, really well said. As we bring this to a close, and I feel like it'd be awesome in a month or 2 after everything happens to do a part 2 of this, to like kind of see everything you've learned from it. But what's next? What's happening November 12th, other than probably like, some good whiskey or something?
Well, originally it was Bali. I can tell you, Bali was on the roadmap. If the market doesn't take a tank, there is some money that in crypto that was saved for me to go to Bali on the 12th. It's funny, tying back to what you were just saying, like any podcaster that is creating a podcast and has not given up, like they are the heroes of content creation, in my opinion, right? we've heard, every stat, right? The average podcast dies after 7 episodes or whatever that may be. Like, that's the same in these NFT projects, right? There are a lot of people that just like a podcast. Oh, I have a great idea. Yeah, anyone can create a podcast. I just talk into a microphone. I upload it to a site. It gets pushed out, right? And we've seen people come and go, burn out. Not burn out. I will say what I've learned in building this brand of 365 is that the layer of trust that I've established across this Web3 community is something that can't be bought, right? I know very wholeheartedly that I don't have to ask people to trust me in what I'm building right now, right? It's like I've been showing up every day. The market was good, the market was bad. The day my wallet got compromised, I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in NFTs, $54,000 in crypto. I launched a podcast episode that day. I bought an NFT that day into a clean wallet, right? And for me, November 12th, I'll make this kind of guarantee. I will not be the only podcaster doing, I will not be doing a solo, daily show. We're going to keep the content going. I'm bringing on a couple other hosts into our kind of ecosystem. Some diversity of voice is a big piece of this. And then the other part of it is for me, we've done it on video. I've done of the 343 that we're up till today, over 300 videos we have that I've created. Even when it's a solo episode, I talk in the camera, and so a lot of that is what can we do with that? All of this content that we have, where can we push some of those envelopes? And so I think November 12th to me it's the start of chapter 2. I think it's also a reset of expectations for my audience, right? Hey, this is what's going to happen. The podcast will continue without question. What will happen with buying an NFT every day? It's still up in the air. I was pretty sold on not doing that. Yeah. And then in the last week or so, I had somebody come and say, hey, if they were willing to bootstrap it as far as pay for it, would I be willing to continue on researching and buying an NFT every day? And I was like, oh man, I didn't think of that.
Yeah. And then then you realize that it's what's your morning routine? Brush your teeth, get your coffee, buy an NFT.
It's been, it's the craziest thing is when I started the podcast is what I thought was gonna be hard.
Yeah.
But the buying an NFT and making sure that NFT was gonna be valuable or at least around come November was the stress. I was spending, early on, it was 4 to 6 hours a day researching the upcoming days to buy an NFT. Now I've come a little bit, I've kind of honed in my research, and there are certain projects that I'm if it launches and these 3 things check the box, I can buy that for the collection, right? I've definitely matured in that realm. But it's gonna be fun. I think the beauty also is Web3 space, NFTs, crypto, blockchain, metaverse. We need more content creators. We need more podcasts. I've had 5 or 6 other podcasters on my podcast, which most people are like, what the hell are you doing? And I'm I look at it as this isn't a zero-sum game. I love that you had me on here. And I think there is something beautiful about, when I look back at November 12th, a year from November 12th, it'll be some version of 365. We have a newsletter that we've been really dialed in. We have a book that a coffee table book of NFTs that we've been kind of finalizing now, that someone you'll be able to buy and see all these NFTs and why we bought them and what was the mint price. And this is all, you don't have to own the big collection to own kind of a piece of that. But cool. Yeah, it's crazy to think that I'm 23 days out, 22 days out. And we're still kind of finalizing what November 12th will be. And I think that's partially a byproduct of this entire podcast.
Yeah. Well, I love that it's going to be, it sounds like it's kind of the start of a new journey. It's not all right, that's it. We're good. I'll see you later.
That's for sure.
It's much more probably a little bit of a well-deserved break. And then man, let's keep rolling. So I'm super stoked to see what's next and also just see how the next couple weeks unfold. And so Brian, really appreciate you coming on the show. You're a voice that I encourage our audience, keep following Brian on Twitter. Everywhere that he's sharing out information, because I feel like you're one of the leaders in the space. And like you said, you don't have to convince people that they should trust you. You've put the work in ways that most people haven't. So I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing some of your story.
Thanks for having me, man. Much appreciated.
Absolutely.